Hi, this is Mr. Den, and this is the Unit 3 review for the exam. And you asked if I would do a voiceover for this, and so here's the information that you're looking for to get ready for the exam. Congress is organized into a two-house legislature. It's called bicameral, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives has two-year terms. They start in odd number years, and each term has two sessions in them, one per year. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives, and each of those representatives represents one district, and they call that single district representation. The number of reps that each state has is based on population, just like the Virginia plan. And every 10 years, by the Constitution, there's a census. And that census determines not only how many people live in the United States, but what state they live in, or how many people live in each state. Once they determine where people live, then they have to make sure that each district has approximately the same number of people in it. And in order to do that, they redistrict every 10 years or reallocate where those representatives will represent. If you move those boundaries in order to help your party or to gain an advantage politically, that's called gerrymandering, and that is illegal. And gerrymandering is usually not, you can't prove it unless the boundaries are very unusual. The qualifications for the House of Representatives is 25 years old, 7-year citizen, and you live in the state that you represent. Now, you know you don't have to live in the district that you represent, but you definitely have to live in the state that you represent. The qualifications for the Senate are 30 years old and citizen for 9 years and live in the state that you represent. How about the organization and rules of the Senate? Well, there's 100 members, 2 per state. Of course, that can change depending upon how many states you have in the United States. Those terms are 6 years long, and they're at-large representatives. In other words, there are 2 senators that share representation for that state. The franking privilege is a privilege that both the House and Senate have, and that means they get free stationery and postage. Oftentimes looking like advertising, but you can't. Legally, you're not supposed to be able to. You can't advertise for free on the government's dollar, but if you don't put "vote for me" on there, you can get away with it, and that's called the franking privilege. The control of the House and Senate is based, or trying to control the membership of the House and the Senate, is done by either censure or if you expel someone. It's difficult to expel people from the House or the Senate. If you are extremely disorderly or your behavior is extremely bad, you can be expelled by a 2/3 vote. It's very difficult to get. And then your minor offenses can be punished by censure, or basically being scolded, which means that you oftentimes don't get reelected because it's used against you. Incumbents usually win re-election, especially in the House of Representatives, because they're smaller districts and you only have 1 per district. But people recognize you. You can get money. Gerrymandering still happens even though it's illegal. But your voters know you because you've been in front of them. You've had the franking privilege to be able to send literature to them. And you've been able to help your constituents so that they feel like you have done something for them and they remember you for that. All right, House of Representatives leadership. Well, we know that the Speaker of the House is the leader of the House of Representatives. It's created by the Constitution. The Senate doesn't have one. And that Speaker of the House is from the majority party in a very powerful position. The majority leader is the person that assists the Speaker, and they make sure that the people follow party lines, just like the party whips do. Both the majority and minority have a party whip. And the minority leader is the leader of the party that is not in control of the House or Senate at that time. Lawmaking in the House, the Rules Committee is very powerful and important because they get to decide when and for how long those bills will be discussed. And therefore, there's no filibuster in the House of Representatives because of the Rules Committee. Now, in order to do business in the House of Representatives, you need a quorum. That's 1/2 of the House of Representatives present for them to do business or to vote. That means 218 representatives need to be present to have a quorum. That's half. The official leader of the Senate is the vice president, but the person who runs the meetings is the president pro temp. The vice president usually isn't president unless he's trying to break a tie. All right, in the Senate, because there is no rules committee, you have unlimited debate, and that means that you can have a filibuster. Bills can be stalled or delayed, causing them not to be able to come to a vote, which jams up or log jams the Senate from being able to call for a vote. The only way it can be ended is through what they call cloture, and they could be vote for cloture, which is a vote for the end of a filibuster, and that takes 60 votes to do that. Now, in order to get a bill through, you have most of the work is done in committee. The standing committees are permanent committees, and there's a dozen and a half of these committees ballpark in the House and the Senate, and these are ones that are needed to address bills on a regular basis. So these are very common areas like education or welfare or housing or labor or armed forces, but permanent committees. Now, a lot of work goes from the permanent committee right to a subcommittee, a smaller group that has more expertise and can work on those bills. There's also select committees, and sometimes those select committees are joint committees, excuse me, and that means that they will work on probably investigating bills, or excuse me, investigating issues that Congress wants to know more about, but they're almost always temporary. Joint committees made up of both members of House and Congress also include conference committees. Now, a conference committee is very important because that conference committee resolves differences between different versions of similar bills so that the president either can be moved forward to the president because it has to be the same version or the same wording. Now, we talked about the constitutional powers of Congress, like the enumerated powers, and those are the specifically listed powers. There's 17 of them, and there's just a few of them here that you're familiar with, like collecting taxes, coining money, declaring war, making an army and navy. Those are the ones that are identified and specifically listed, the enumerated powers. But then we have Clause 18, which then opens up and empowers Congress specifically, and that's called the Necessary and Proper Clause. It says that Congress can do what's necessary and proper to run the country, and that implies some certain powers, and it stretches or elasticizes the powers of Congress. It makes them much stronger. Now, the powers that are denied to Congress of the Bill of Rights obviously limits what Congress can do. Courts determine if a person is being held in jail legally, and that's habeas corpus, and you can't deny people their habeas corpus. There are no bills of attainder, so you can't pass a law and just make people guilty because you passed a law. And you can't go back and make something that someone did before illegal now. There are obviously lawmaking powers, which is the main power of Congress, and all revenue bills or lawmaking that has to do with raising money has to start in the House of Representatives, and it goes immediately to the House Ways and Means Committee, and that's a very powerful committee. Appropriation bills are spending bills. Congress can borrow money. That's part of lawmaking powers, but that adds to our debt. We're getting pretty good at that. And then the power to regulate interstate commerce is also a lawmaking power. Now, Congress also has some significant foreign powers, which include declaring war. Remember, the president can't declare war, but he can get us into one. It's up to the Congress to be able to declare war. And the Senate ratifies treaties made by the president. The House and Senate regulates the Army and Navy, and they have the power of the War Powers Act. And the War Powers Act obviously means, and we talked quite a bit about this, that the president can send in troops for 60 days anywhere he wants. But after 60 days, Congress has the power, at least at this point, to recall those troops. Now, there's a couple of non-legislative powers that Congress has, powers where they're not making laws. One of them is to impeach and remove the president, and one of them is to have, oh gosh, what I was trying to think of the other part. Picking the president if no presidential candidate receives a majority of the Electoral College votes. Then the House of Representatives has to come in and do that. All right. We know that riders are things added to bills, oftentimes to help get other senators or congressmen to vote for the bill. Pigeonholing means that you are there to, or that in the committees, the committee ignores the bill, doesn't talk about it at all, which kills the bill. In those hearings, they can have markups, which are like edits or additions that you add to the bill. And then once that work is done, then the committee will either vote to pass the bill on with favorable support, or to send an unfavorable report and say that we don't like this bill. And finally, voting. You have to have a quorum to vote, which means you have to have half or more present. There are voice votes where they just call all those in favor and they all say aye or nay. But the problem with the voice votes is we don't know who said yes or no. And we want that record. If we want that record, then you're going to have to call for a standing vote or a roll call vote, which is what they do in the Senate. The only type of voting they don't do in the Senate is the electronic voting, because there's 4 times as many House of Representative members and only 100 senators. So the senators don't feel like they need that electronic voting, whereas the House finds it very helpful and helps speed things up. Don't forget about the conference committees. We already talked about that, revising the 2 versions down into 1. And then if it does finally get to the president, there are 4 actions. The first thing the president can do is sign it into law. The next thing the president can do is to veto it or return it to Congress. Then they have some time to override it with a 2/3 vote, or the president can ignore the bill, but after 10 days it becomes a law anyway, or he can ignore the bill, and if Congress goes out of session or adjourns before those 10 days are up, they call that a pocket veto, because there's no way for Congress to be able to override the veto because they're not in session. So there's a quick review for you to prep you for the Unit 3 exam, and I'll try to get some more help for you online as soon as possible. Thanks.